Hi there, today we're going to be showing you how to achieve this in no time at all, primarily with dry brushing. So in today's video we're going to be looking to achieve this on a large base using Series D. Fantastic texture here, really good contrast between light and dark, and we've also taken some inspiration from nature in terms of where our highlights are, our shadows, and where we're putting the vegetation. So here we have our rather large and beautiful base. This has been done using Games Workshop's Martian Iron Earth texture paint. If you would like to see more on how to get the best out of Games Workshop's technical paints and make them behave in a more reliable fashion, check out the video which we will link here. So we're going to paint this, just prime it normally, and then we're going to rock on with painting. Okay, so we've used Sistel's Chaos Black Primer, which is a very reliable black primer spray, and we've given that a pretty thorough undercoating. There's a few bits where it may have not quite got exactly under recesses, but we don't have to worry about that. We've tried to catch everything from most angles, and all of those gaps will get filled in with washes in the following stages. Okay, for the next step, we're going to be taking Eshin Grey and Huldra Blue from scale 75, mix them together a little bit on our palette, and then roughly beginning to build up texture on the rocky sections. We'll also be catching the sticking up areas of the flat texture, and that'll kind of feed into our plans for things looking natural later on. So first step, let's put a little bit of water in our dampening pad. Work it in with a finger. If you'd like to see more on how the dampening pad works in depth and stuff like that, we've got a video of me painting an ATST on our channel, which we can link up here, and that'll take you through exactly the purposes of it and stuff like that, but we do use it in every single dry brushing video. So I'm going to take a little bit of the grey, put it on our palette. We're not dipping too deeply into that. Don't want to saturate the brush, it's not good for anything. And then take some of our blue. This is just to keep things a little bit darker. Work them together and then start covering our base. So I'll do this over the entirety of the base, and then we'll come back for the next step. So our next step is combining Eshin Grey and Fenrisian Grey to keep that kind of a blue hint that we've got going on there, and we're going to carry on dry brushing up all over the model, but again concentrating on the rocky areas for the brighter sections. Okay, so using the dampening pad, we're going to drag these two colours together. And this is going to be a fairly delicate but heavy dry brush, or you could almost call this an overbrush. We want to be catching the majority of these rocks, only leaving the very recesses with the darker colours. And we'll complete this over the entire base, again catching those little flat sections. Even though we're going to cover this over, this is still going to make parts of them brighter, which will be useful. Alright, so we've just put some water in our dampening pad, and we can move on to the next stage, which is to increase the amount of Fenrisian Grey that we have, and start to dry brush a little bit more delicately and lightly, looking to just really to highlight the details on the rocks here we've got there, made of slate, so they've got some gorgeous texture on them, and we're going to really carefully pick them out and start bringing them up in terms of how bright they are. Doesn't matter if we hit the other areas of the base, as we've said, even though we're going to cover them over. This is just going to make sure that the raised areas are brighter and the recesses are darker, so it's kind of like pre-shading for the next step. We will continue this over the rest of the base, and then we'll be able to move on to a pure Fenrisian highlight for the next stage. Okay, so the next step is a far lighter version, including pretty much pure Fenrisian Grey, Still using the same brush and we're still using the same area of our palette, so some of that previous darker grey is in the mix, so it's not a 100% pure one, but it is quite a few steps lighter, so we're going to be using this really carefully across the entirety of the base, and this is one of those magic steps that really shows the worth of taking your time a little bit more, going over every single area of the base and picking out all those gorgeous textured areas that we have. If you wanted to do a grayscale base, then you could just pretty much leave it here. This would be a really, really nice looking base. You can involve pigments or something like that, and it'll still look super effective. We're going to be doing a few more steps, but we're going to take our time with this one and work it up so that we end up with a really high amount of contrast between our lighter areas that are raised and our darker areas in the recesses. So the previous step with the Fin Regime Grey is done. It's looking fantastic. We could leave it there or just put some pigments on or some tufts and paint the rim back and call it, but what we're going to be doing is mixing these three, Doombull Brown, Mornfang Brown, and the contrast paint Flesh Tearers Red to keep that kind of Martian-y hue to it, and we're going to be base coating the entirety of our sandy areas with that. So what we've done is we've mixed 1 part Mornfang Brown, 1 part Doombull Brown, 2 parts Flesh Tearers Red, and 3 parts water. And what this has opened up for us after a little bit of experimentation is a perfect mix for getting a decent level of coverage on the model, but also allowing the previous stages we've done to punch through and give us some extra levels of detail from that incidental dry brushing that we managed to catch the earth with. So we'll do this all over the base, and then we'll move on to the next step. So as you'll have probably noticed, I tried out another colour first and wasn't happy with it. Because the ground's not always completely uniform, this is a great way to kind of fade in a couple of colours without it being overly noticeable. So I've just taken 3 big blobs and popped it in that area that's another colour, which is close but not exactly as close as we need. And then just by adding water, I can join together those blobs with this nice big brush holding plenty of moisture. I can join together the blobs, and hopefully by the time we're finished no one will be any the wiser. Basing is very forgiving in this way. You don't have to worry too much about things being exactly uniform. It's not a panel of a Space Marine or something like that, which is meant to be inorganic. You've got all the scope in the world to change things around. Also, if our stages work their way up the edges of the model, you can quickly fade them out with a bit of water or remove them with a wet finger or something like that. So the environment will be working its way up the rocks, and if you want to work it up there, take a dip of water on your brush, then you can just fade things in around the edge for what you need, or indeed cover the entire thing there. It's up to you how much of your underlying sandy area you want to be working your way onto the rocks. You could have this completely dilute like this and only get a very subtle suggestion of it, or even pull it up from the basin and pick it up according to how you wanted, or you can put it all over. It's entirely up to you depending on what effect you want. I'm going to be going for middle ground, and I'll do that all over the base. So it goes without saying this is quite an abusive process on your brush with it being a base coat, so make sure you clean it afterwards. I tend to have a brush reserved for this type of purpose. I'm just going to show you here a great way to do what I was describing in terms of making up a little mix to fade into those rocks and keep coherency across all of the base. You can see me adding water into this well of the palette, and I'm going to use that much more dilute mix just around the edges of the rocks to help fade them with it. You could drag it all the way over if you liked. Indeed, I may do that with the next step, but you can do this around the edges, or you can pull it up just with water. In that case, you'll only get a tiny bit of what's come from the ground to kind of just about cover the rocks like that. All the ways are fine. It just depends how much of your environment you want to be dragging over these different coloured sections here. Okay, for our next stage, now that's dried, we're going to be mixing these three. Bit of a strange mix, but it's an effective one, and that's going to be our next step using a medium dry brush. Okay, so we've got some water on our dampening pad. Moisten these bristles up, then we're good to go. I'm working from my texture palette because the paint will dry out a little bit faster on this, so I've spooned it out with a big old brush that has had better days, and then I'm taking it from here before applying it to the base. This is a generous dry brush. We're going to get all over, and the only places we're really taking care is as we get closer to our rocks. To try and hit absolutely everything we can, and we'll do this over the entire base. It's going to take a while with a smaller brush, but it's going to be worth it. Okay, so we've taken our time with that step. It's looking really, really good now. We're really starting to reap the benefits of the scheme that we're using. For our next stages, we're going to take Troll Slayer Orange and add that into our previous mix, and we're also going to add a little bit of Karak Stone here as well. So we're not worried at all about having our previous stage on our brush, because it's going to help us maintain coherency. We're even going to mix it in the same spot on the palette for that reason. And then using the same brush, we're going to carefully go over all of these areas and pick out the raised edges. Gently at first, while there's more paint on the brush, even if we have removed it on our texture palette. So you can see here I'm using an extremely soft stroking motion, but as the paint is used up off the brush, we can afford to be a little bit less delicate and work a bit faster. So we'll do that over the entire thing, and we're really going to start seeing the amazing texture we've built up with that thick layer of texture paint and picking out the edges. So for our next step, we're going to simply swap out the Troll Slayer Orange for Fire Dragon Bright. This bone colour, by the way, you could be using, you could swap out any of these colours obviously, but you could swap this for any colour you wanted. You could be using Morghast Bone or something from another range, or even an off-white, whatever fits your taste really. So as with previous stages, we're just going to drag our colours into each other until we're happy with the ratio. This is getting more towards a flesh colour now, interestingly, but it'll work perfectly for what we're trying to achieve here. And then taking care to be quite soft, we're going to gently dry brush these really softly at this stage. We're looking to pick out the edges and leave our previous stages so there's some of each layer showing, just like layering as normal, but we're doing it with dry brushing. So we'll take our time, but we're really going to see things jump out now because we're using a colour that is so much different from our deep reddy base coat that we had. So for the next stage, we're just adding Screaming Skull into the same mix. Carefully pulling it on our palette, making sure we don't have too much on the brush. And then really softly getting this. This will catch any lip it touches. So we only need a tiny amount of pressure, but it will make everything pop. We've taken a fair amount of care not to hit our stones too much throughout this process, but if we have, it doesn't matter too much. So I thought I'd show you guys this because not a lot of people dry brush in this manner. If you're trying to do delicate stuff with something that is so much brighter, you can use little buffing motions, and then rather than your strokes coming from one particular direction, you're going to have a universal highlight on stuff. This is, you'd call this buffing, I guess, and it's a really nice way to do things softly perhaps without strokes looking like they have a particular direction, which is often useful for lighting or something like that, or if you're working on a model you can go from top to bottom, generally speaking, but here we just want it to be universal, so I'm going to be using buffing a little bit and alongside other techniques just to make sure that things are softened up and made to look a little bit more realistic. Okay, for our final step, we're just going to increase the amount of Screaming Skull in the final mix and use that pretty much exclusively. It's quite easy if you have pass between rocks to end up foiling them with a dry brushing. Do your best to try and avoid that by making your strokes go in different directions, but what we can do is any areas we want to break up or any areas we want to fix where we feel there's a mistake, we can just put some vegetation in there and grab it. We'll be doing the rocks after this, but anywhere where we don't like something, we can hide it, and it'll give us a nice way to organically put tufts around the entirety of the base and make it look more natural. Okay, so with a higher proportion of Screaming Skull in the mix, just dampen our brush first of all, Mix it in the same area. This is obviously going to be very bright, so we're going to be pretty careful with this. Softly, softly. It's going to get picked up extremely easily on the surface we're on. So it's worth testing it elsewhere on your texture palette, on your hand, to make sure that too much won't be leaving your bristles. We still want some orange in the mix, because otherwise it will become a little bit desaturated and almost grayscale. But that looks about perfect. So we'll do that, and we'll do this over the entire model. You can see it's really easily picking up all those edges. So it shouldn't take too long. These steps tend to get faster. So try and take your time, even on steps that go quickly, because often the last 3 or 4 steps where you really reap the benefits of all the time you've put in before, so there's no point rushing them, because they'll go pretty fast naturally. So that's the final step on that section, the flat section done. We're going to go back to the rocks now. It's looking really, really good around here. Fantastic levels of detail and interest going on. We're going to be using Fenrisian Grey and Matte White to re-highlight these rocks. All of that overspill we've got should help them blend in with their natural environment, but we still want them to stand out as individual pieces, so this will make sure that they are tied in but still have enough interest to pull the eye. Okay, so we're going to drag our 2 colours together until we're happy with a mix. For the first stage we'll have a fair bit of Space Wolves Grey involved. And this should help counter, at least on the raised areas, not in the recesses, but this should help counter any overspill we've had. We'll do this on all of our rocks, going fairly slowly and carefully, but it's not going to take too long because it's so much brighter than the previous stages. Okay, so this is all really starting to take shape now. It's looking really good. The white bouncing back a little more on the camera than it is in real life, so it's slightly more subtle. We're going to add more white into our Space Wolves Grey than we had previously. Going gently, because as we've said a few times, it's really going to, as you get to the final stages, it's very easy for the areas you're hitting with this to pick it up according to texture. So we'll take our time and we'll add white gently into the mix. Probably one stage after this with almost pure white but still on the same brush, and then we'll be ready for detailing. And for the final brush stage now, we're pretty much taking pure white, so we'll take that over to the same bit of our palette that we've been using previously, but we won't be adding any of the Fenrisian Grey to the mix. Working it into our brush gently, using our dampening pad to soften it slightly so it's not pure white that's going onto the model, and then we're going to be hitting this with a very careful, almost imperceptible, gentle overbrush using this white. These stages tend to be really, really quick because you don't have to go back to the palette often. You're not looking to hit any area with a large amount of paint. You're just working your way, looking to tint the edges in order to make them jump out that little bit extra. So this is looking fantastic with that final white highlight on it. What we're going to do now is hit the base rims with a black. They're already black, but just to neaten this up here, you'll really see the benefit of it once we've done it. I'm going to use matte black from Orange Painter, it's a personal favourite of mine. We'll do that, and then we're going to do some detailing with some tufts, and we are done. Okay, so we've done our black base rim and we've put down a couple of different types of tuft. We've got some smaller, more delicate ones here, and then we've got some larger ones here, and we've used the different heights of them in different places just according to what we feel. Naturally your bases will be darker, closer to the rocks, and also that fits with in nature, it'd be a bit more moist there and there'd be more shelter, so that's where I've concentrated these. You can put a couple out in the open, I might add a couple out in the open, but in terms of where you put your stuff, I generally tend to cluster them wherever it's darkest, wherever it's in shelter, and I cut my tufts in half so I can back them up to the rocks more easily. But that's our final base. I think it looks great. So I think that's been a huge success. This has turned out really, really well. We've got gorgeous texture on that base. We've worked with our natural environment that we've set it in. We've worked around the shadows here. We've got really nice highlighting on the rocks. We've got some like contrast between them. And because what we've done is we've worked from a black base, you could take the colors we've used and swap them for just using the grays, then putting on some pigments. You could have it a lot warmer, a lot darker. You could go less orangey, just keep it more like a downtrodden, earthy brown. You could completely cover it in foliage almost and just use that as the base for it. It's a really, really diverse technique, so I hope you found it useful. And if you would like to see anything specific demonstrated, for example, a quicker way using Games Workshop's texture paints and actually using the colour that they come with rather than painting over them and just using them for their texture, then let us know what you'd like to see down below. Comment, like and subscribe and all of that stuff, and tune in for our upcoming videos.